Hands behind your back. Marcus's voice carried across the community green as two security guards shoved Alyssa against the cold patrol car. Her breath fogged the glass. The oak's leaves rattled in the wind, and parents froze near the playground. Phones came up. Everyone watched. Private property, trespass, she's banned, Marcus said, smug as ever. He held a laminated rule card like it was law. You just triggered a preservation duty, I said evenly. That body cam stays on, and the easement you're standing on is county recorded. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. Who are you two? I'm Daniel Carter, I cut in, resting my palm against the oak's bark. Retired federal compliance auditor. I trained agencies on chain of custody. I know what gets tossed out and what ruins people who think rules are toys. The wind carried cut grass and sap. Alyssa blinked at me, steady. You're okay, I said, phone recording. The guard's camera light glowed red, still rolling. This isn't your backyard, I told Marcus. This is a pedestrian easement. Residents have the right to cross. She was heading to the tree her father planted after September 11th. You know that. His smirk faltered. My brother planted this oak when the streets were dirt and houses half built. He came back from the station with blistered hands and silent grief. Alyssa was a toddler then. Pressing acorns into the soil, he showed her how to pat down. When he died, this path became more than a shortcut. It was the promise I made at a graveside too wide for words. Release her, I said. Now, you've got no cause for force on a resident. Keep her cuffed, and you're escalating without a lawful basis. Your insurer won't like that. Marcus scoffed. Insurers don't tell me how to... They do when your contractor exceeds scope, I said. Your agreement says observe and report, not detain minors. Silence. The guard shifted, eyes flicking toward Marcus. You're bluffing, he muttered. I raised my phone toward the oak, the plaque dulled by sun. My brother's name gleamed faint. Alyssa walks this path every day. You call it trespass. I call it a memorial route. And I'm issuing a litigation hold on all footage from this tree today. Neighbors edged closer, shoes scraped, a stroller squeaked. One guard eased his grip just enough for Alyssa to turn her head. Breathe, I told her. Marcus jabbed a finger at me. He's filming residents without consent. Public view, I said. And your own sign by the pool says security cameras in use. That's notice. You don't get it both ways. His card shook in his hand. My own nerves burned hot, not fear, just power winding up. This isn't over, he snapped. No, I said. It's documented. The guard unclipped the cuffs with a metallic sigh. Alyssa rubbed her wrist, refusing to look at Marcus. The breeze carried lake water and clover, sweet and sharp. I logged the exact minute and stepped closer to the plaque. Where are you watching from? I asked the gathering neighbors, and the thousands more I could already feel. Because here, we honor what was planted with grief and kept alive with promise. Marcus straightened, slipping on the mask he wore at board meetings. Board action is coming. I know, I said quietly. You chose the wrong oak, the wrong girl, and the wrong uncle. The body cam's red light pulsed. A judge would want a clean chain. I'd give him that. My hand pressed the bark my brother once patted like a shoulder. The first move was preservation. The second would make Marcus watch. Marcus's words still echoed. Board action is coming, when Alyssa and I stepped off the green. The oak's shadow stretched long behind us, and I felt its weight more than the setting sun. My niece stayed quiet, clutching her wrist, though she didn't want me to see the red marks the cuffs had left. I kept my phone in my palm, its recording still secured. The body cam light had burned the whole time. That chain mattered more than Marcus knew. By the time we reached my porch, the whispers had spread. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks, some pretending to water their lawns, others too shaken to look away. Everyone had seen a teenager slammed against a car for walking on grass. That image would linger, burned into the community's memory. But I also knew most of them wouldn't speak up. Fear of fines kept mouths shut better than duct tape ever could. Inside, I set my phone on the table and poured Alyssa a glass of water. Her eyes were defiant, though her hands trembled as she took it. You don't have to carry this, I told her. She shook her head. Dad wanted me to walk there, she whispered. Just 7 words, but they carried more conviction than any threat Marcus could manufacture. I stepped to the window. The view stretched down to the lake, perfect symmetry. Fences lined like stitched scars, manicured hedges boxed tight, and the community green where the oak stood sentinel. It was beautiful, yes, but beauty often hides control. And here, control was Marcus's favorite weapon. He'd built a pattern out of it. I'd seen him humiliate a neighbor over a garden hose, force another to strip a swing set because it didn't meet safety code, even threaten a veteran for a flagpole a half-foot too tall. Patterns matter. When I was an auditor, we looked for them the way miners look for veins of ore. A single act might be written off as error. A pattern proved intent. Marcus thrived on intent. He pushed until people broke or yielded. Tonight he thought he'd broken Alyssa. He hadn't realized she wasn't the one he had to face. The house felt too small with the weight of what had just happened. I walked into my study, the old room lined with files and framed certificates that reminded me of a career built on details most people overlooked. Chain of custody, statutory limits, indemnity clauses, cold words to some. But to me, they were weapons sharper than any blade. On the wall hung my brother's firefighter helmet, dented from a collapsed beam years ago. He'd trusted me with his daughter when he couldn't trust the world to keep her safe. That helmet watched me now, and it asked one question. Are you going to let this stand? The phone buzzed. A message from a neighbor named Brian lit the screen. Saw what happened. Disgraceful. Don't use my name, but I'll talk if you need me. He wasn't the first to reach out in whispers, and he wouldn't be the last. Fear kept them quiet, but outrage simmered beneath the silence. I tapped the message closed and leaned back. Victory wouldn't come from shouting across lawns or arguing with Marcus at the mailbox. It would come from precision, from procedure, from using the very system he thought protected him. Marcus believed the HOA was untouchable, but their private security wasn't. Contracts have limits, insurance has teeth, and body cams, those red blinking lights, belonged in the chain of truth, not his pocket. Alyssa walked in, arms crossed. He's not going to stop. No, I admitted. He won't, which means neither can we. I looked at her, the set of her jaw so much like her father's, and I felt the surge again. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. Marcus had overplayed his hand. He had taken his pattern of control and dragged a minor into it, in public, on video. That was a line even the most complacent judge couldn't ignore. From the porch, I could still see neighbors drifting inside, blinds snapping shut. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was tension, pulled tight as a tripwire. I knew what came next. Marcus would call an emergency board session, parade his laminated rules, and twist what happened into safety enforcement. He'd rely on fear to carry the story. But I had something stronger than fear. I had evidence. I set my phone back into its case, the file encrypted and backed up. The oak's shadow stretched into the night, and I promised myself that before this was over, Marcus would be forced to watch that same footage in a place where smirks don't survive. Under oath, in front of a judge who knew exactly how chain of custody worked. I backed up the footage twice before the night ended. One copy on my drive and one locked to the cloud. The house had gone quiet, but the silence wasn't rest. It was preparation. Alyssa finally fell asleep on the couch, clutching a blanket too thin for the chill that crept through the vents. I draped my brother's old jacket over her shoulders and let her be. My work wouldn't wait for morning. The next day, the HOA clubhouse buzzed like a hive. The board had called an emergency session. I knew Marcus's style: strike fast, control the narrative, and drown truth in paperwork. The lot was already packed when I pulled in. A banner reading "Community First" fluttered above the entrance, the irony too sharp to ignore. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and copy toner. Residents sat stiff in metal chairs, whispers passing like static. Marcus stood at the front with his clipboard, voice sharp and commanding. He pointed to a printout of rules and regulations tacked on the wall, rewriting last night's assault into a tidy violation. Safety enforcement, he called it, his lips curling with authority. I didn't move toward the seats. I stood by the back wall, arms crossed, letting him talk. That's when I noticed Sarah Hill, the youngest board member, pressed into her chair like she wanted to disappear. her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles pale. Her eyes darted between Marcus and the crowd, but every time he made eye contact, she flinched just enough to betray herself. Sarah had always struck me as someone decent. She taught at the middle school, volunteered at the library, not power-hungry like the others. But here she was, sitting silent, while Marcus rewrote what everyone had seen with their own eyes. I caught her gaze once, held it. She looked away, jaw tight. Marcus slammed his palm against the podium. Residents will respect board authority, or they will face consequences. He let the words hang, feeding on silence. This child, he didn't even use Alyssa's name, was in violation. She resisted security direction. We acted within rights. Gasps rippled through the room. A few nodded, afraid. More shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge him openly. That was Marcus's grip. Fear disguised as order. But Sarah's expression betrayed something different. Her lips parted, then pressed shut. She wanted to speak. Her conscience clawed at her. I stepped forward just enough to let my shoes echo on the tile. "That body cam says otherwise," I said, voice steady but carrying. Heads turned, Marcus's jaw tightened. "Your contractor exceeded their scope. Observe and report, not detain. And they cuffed a minor. That's unlawful restraint." Murmurs swelled. Neighbors leaned forward. Sarah's hands trembled against her notebook, a faint scratch of pen on paper. She was recording, I realized. Not Marcus's words, mine. She wanted proof of what she already knew, but hadn't dared to admit aloud. Marcus sneered. "You think you're the authority here, Carter? This is a private association. We enforce the rules." "You enforce what your insurer allows," I said. "And they don't insure liability when your guards cross into unlawful force. You've opened a chain of exposure that doesn't end in this room." His face flushed crimson, but I didn't press further, not yet. Strategy was patience. My job wasn't to win tonight. It was to plant the crack that would widen with time. Sarah's eyes flicked back to me, conflicted, but this time she didn't look away. She whispered something to the board secretary beside her, then quickly pretended to adjust her papers. I saw it in her posture. She was already wrestling with Marcus's version of events. It wouldn't be long before her silence broke. The meeting adjourned with Marcus's gavel hitting the table too hard. People filed out, muttering under their breath. Some avoided me. Others brushed close with whispered encouragement. "Don't stop!" We saw it. Fear kept their voices low, but the current of support was there. I walked out into the sunlight, air heavy with summer heat. Sarah lingered near the clubhouse door, gripping her notebook like a shield. When our paths crossed, she hesitated. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. The struggle was painted all over her face. She wanted to help. She just didn't know if she was ready to stand against Marcus. I let the silence carry between us. She needed to make her own choice. But I knew the look. I'd seen it in witnesses before, torn between loyalty and truth. When the time came, Sarah Hill would matter more than Marcus could ever imagine. I slid my phone back into my pocket, feeling the encrypted file like a live wire against my side. The oak stood waiting across the green, silent witness to everything. And I knew. Marcus's pattern of control had just gained its first fracture. The sun dropped low, throwing long shadows from the oak across the green, when the first letter slid under my door. The paper scraped the hardwood like a blade. I didn't have to open it to know Marcus's fingerprints were all over it. Still, I unfolded it slowly, the typeface stiff and official. Notice of escalating violation. Daily fines commencing immediately. Community safety enforcement authorized. The words blurred into a familiar pattern. Marcus's weapon of choice. Paperwork. He'd escalated from threats to financial strangulation. It was how he broke families who couldn't afford to fight back. But I wasn't just another name on his list. I had already secured the chain, and every new move he made was another thread pulling him into the web he'd spun. Alyssa stood behind me, arms folded, her voice flat. "He won't stop until he takes the oak." She wasn't wrong. To Marcus, this wasn't about rules. It was about power, and he'd chosen the tree because he knew what it symbolized to us. If he could uproot it, he could uproot our legacy. I folded the notice and set it on the counter. The house felt too small for the storm brewing, so I walked outside, letting the cool night air settle the heat in my chest. Neighbors' blinds quivered, eyes watching but not daring to step out. I could almost hear their thoughts. If he can break Carter, what chance do we have? The next day I found myself standing in the community pool area of all places. Chlorine stung the air, and the shouts of children echoed off the water dot. But the board had posted another notice here, taped crooked against the bulletin board. Security presence will be expanded to ensure compliance. Expanded. That meant more guards, more intimidation, more stage confrontations. It also meant more cameras, more recordings, more evidence Marcus couldn't control. I took a photo, time-stamped it, then turned toward the gate. Marcus was there, leaning against the post, like he owned it. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, his smile smug. "You just confirmed scope creep," I said evenly. "Every new guard you post adds liability, and every camera they wear is another witness you can't erase." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're clever, Carter, but I'll bury you in fines before you ever get to court." I didn't flinch. "You can only bury people who don't know where to dig. I spent 20 years in federal audits. I know exactly where to dig." His smirk wavered, but he masked it quickly, turning toward a cluster of parents near the pool. "Board has a duty to keep this place safe," he announced loudly. "Some residents think rules don't apply to them. We'll prove otherwise." I let him grandstand. Every word he spoke was another layer of arrogance, another stone added to the foundation I was building against him. What he didn't realize was that escalation was my strongest ally. The louder he pushed, the clearer his abuse of power became. Leaving the pool, I walked toward the tennis courts, the metallic twang of rackets echoing against the chain-link fence. This neighborhood was polished perfection on the surface, but behind it lay fear. Fear of Marcus's clipboard, his fines, his endless authority. That fear kept people obedient, but I could feel the cracks widening. As I passed the courts, a neighbor named Brian caught my shoulder. He glanced around before speaking. "Saw the notice? He's overreaching, Daniel. People are talking." His eyes darted nervously toward a security guard posted at the corner. But nobody wants to be the first to stick their neck out. "You won't have to," I said quietly. "Just keep watching. He's already gone too far." Brian nodded once and slipped back through the gate. His words confirmed what I already knew. Marcus's escalation wasn't strengthening his grip. It was loosening it. The more he pushed, the more residents whispered. Whispers would become voices soon enough. Back home, I laid the violation notice beside my brother's helmet. Paper versus steel. Marcus thought fines could bury me, but those papers were already evidence. The oak's shadow stretched across the lawn outside, and I realized something important. Marcus had made this fight public. Now, every step he took tightened the noose around his own authority. I looked at Alyssa, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, fire in her eyes. "He wants to bury us in paper," I said. "Good. Paper leaves a trail." "Paper leaves a trail," I'd told Alyssa, and I meant it. The problem was making sure that trail led outside Marcus's circle of control. He could twist board meetings and notices, but he couldn't erase what his own guards recorded. That was where my expertise mattered most. The next morning, I drove into Arlington and parked in front of the county courthouse. The steps rose in pale stone, the columns tall and solemn against a sky washed clean by overnight rain. I'd walked into buildings like this my entire career, teaching auditors how to spot what police and agencies tried to bury. Now, for the first time in years, I wasn't just teaching. I was carrying the burden myself. Inside, the air smelled of paper, ink, and disinfectant. Security waved me through after a quick ID check. My destination wasn't a courtroom yet. It was the clerk's office. The woman behind the glass window barely looked up until I slid a folded petition toward her. "Request for preservation order," I said, my voice steady. "Security contractor footage, recorded in the Meadowbrook Green HOA on July 14th. Her eyes lifted, sharp now. "Body cam?" "Yes, 2 guards, both contracted through Iron Watch Security." She tapped her keyboard. "Chain of custody request?" "Exactly, immediate, before tampering can occur." I signed the form with the practiced flow of someone who had lived in this world. My career had been about chain integrity, knowing when a single missing timestamp could invalidate an entire investigation. Marcus didn't know it yet, but last night his arrogance had already destroyed his shield. Those cameras had kept running, and because I'd issued a litigation hold in front of witnesses, their recordings were now under legal expectation of preservation. Any alteration would be spoliation. Grounds for sanctions. Walking out, I caught my reflection in the courthouse glass. The face staring back looked older than I remembered, lines carved deep by loss, but behind them was something steady. My brother's death had forced me to raise Alyssa, to trade quiet evenings for guardianship I hadn't been ready for. But today I realized it also gave me the resolve to stand exactly where I was. This wasn't just about a tree or a fine. It was about protecting the memory planted in soil and in a girl's heart. Outside, the city hummed. Cars honked, vendors called, and pigeons scattered across the plaza. I spotted Judge Raymond Ellis stepping down the courthouse steps, his robe traded for a plain suit. We'd crossed paths once in my auditing days, a man known for his demand that evidence be handled without shortcuts. He recognized me instantly. "Carter," he said, brows raised. "Didn't expect to see you here again." "HOA overreach," I replied. "Private security cuffed my niece on a public easement. Body cams caught it all." His expression darkened. "You filed for preservation?" "Just now." "Good." He paused, voice lowering. "If those tapes reach my docket, you can bet they'll play in full." He offered a small nod and moved on, but that brief exchange cemented my resolve. I wasn't alone in this. Someone in authority already understood what Marcus had unleashed. On the drive home, the rain returned, streaking the windshield with silver. I thought of Alyssa at the house, probably sketching near the window, as she always did when storms rolled through. She didn't know it yet, but today we'd taken the first real step toward holding Marcus accountable. When I pulled into the neighborhood, I saw the guards stationed at the pool again, rain dripping off their jackets. One caught my eye, uneasy, as if he already knew what paperwork had just been signed downtown. Their blinking red lights weren't weapons anymore, they were witnesses. I parked, stepped out, and let the rain soak my jacket. Across the green, the oak stood unbowed, roots drinking deep. I whispered to myself, "Preserved." It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a turning point. Marcus thought escalation gave him strength. In truth, every new move tightened the frame around his downfall. Inside, Alyssa looked up as I entered, sketchbook balanced on her knees. "Did you do something today?" she asked. I smiled faintly, shaking rain from my sleeves. "Yes. And soon, Marcus will realize the cameras he relies on don't protect him. They protect us." The storm cleared overnight, but the air the next morning felt heavier than the rain itself. I walked Alyssa to the bus stop at the far edge of the neighborhood, a place where the houses thinned and the streetlights buzzed faintly in the early dawn. She clutched her backpack, stubbornly insisting she could go alone, but after what Marcus had pulled, I wasn't leaving her side in the open. Not yet. The bus rumbled up, brakes squealing, and she climbed aboard. I caught her eye through the glass as she slid into a seat. She gave me a quick nod, half reassurance, half defiance, and then the bus pulled away, red lights vanishing into the curve of the street. That left me standing there alone, the oak in the distance just visible across the green. Except, I wasn't alone. A black SUV idled near the curb, windows tinted, engine low and steady. When it finally pulled away, I caught the Iron Watch logo stenciled faint on the side panel. Marcus wasn't just escalating, he was watching. I walked back slowly, my boots crunching on gravel, letting the quiet hum of the street fill the space. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from the county clerk's office. My preservation order had been logged, stamped, and filed. The footage was officially under court protection now. Any attempt to tamper would put Marcus and his board in a legal vice they couldn't escape. Back at the house, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. I opened my laptop, scrolling through county filings until I found the scanned order. A clean black stamp, today's date, Judge Ellis's initials. My chest tightened with relief. This wasn't abstract anymore. It was binding. The footage Marcus thought he controlled was now out of his reach. But the stakes weren't just legal. They were personal. Alyssa's wrists still bore faint red marks where the cuffs had dug in. Last night, when she thought I wasn't looking, she traced them with her fingers like they were bruises she couldn't explain. That image carved itself into me. Marcus hadn't just tried to control land, he'd scarred a child. And that made this fight non-negotiable. Later that day, I forced myself to walk into the HOA office. The small building sat beside the lake, neat brick walls and glossy windows reflecting sunlight like armor. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish, but beneath it lingered something sour, fear perhaps, or control. Marcus wasn't there, but Sarah Hill sat behind the reception desk, flipping through files. She looked up, startled, then quickly glanced around, making sure no one else was within earshot. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I needed to see where he thinks the power sits," I replied, letting my eyes sweep the polished shelves, the framed certificates of community excellence. Her lips tightened. "He's already drafting a removal order for the oak, says it violates landscaping standards." Her voice shook faintly, and she closed the file in front of her, as if sealing away her complicity. "That tree was planted with board approval 20 years ago," I said. "It's in the minutes. I can find them." She lowered her voice further. "Minutes won't matter to him, but—" Her gaze flicked to the door, then back to me. "The guards are uneasy. They're saying you filed something downtown. He's panicking." Her confession was quick, almost accidental, but it told me everything I needed. Marcus knew. The preservation order had already reached his ears, and the guards had started to question whether his shield could hold. Doubt inside his own circle. That was the first real crack. I leaned closer, my voice steady. "Then he should panic, because the footage isn't his anymore. It's the court's." Sarah's eyes widened, but before she could respond, the door banged open. Marcus strode in, phone pressed to his ear, face set like stone. He barely glanced at us, muttering orders into the receiver about compliance teams and expanded patrols. But I caught the tension in his jaw, the clipped edge in his tone. He was rattled, though he'd never admit it out loud. I turned to leave, letting my steps echo deliberately against the tile. Sarah's gaze followed me, conflicted, her lips pressed tight. She hadn't chosen sides yet, but the weight of what she knew was pulling her closer to the truth. Outside, the lake glittered with sunlight, ripples spreading across the water like signals. I breathed deep, the scent of wet stone and pine sharp in the air. Marcus had escalated again, tightening the noose with new patrols, new threats. But this time, the rope wasn't around my neck. It was around his. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the order still open on the screen. The strategy wasn't complete yet, but the path was clear. Every escalation he made would feed directly into the evidence I was building, and soon he'd find himself cornered not by my words, but by his own actions. The night carried a strange calm, the kind that masks a storm waiting to break. I sat on the back porch, the oak visible in the distance as a dark silhouette against the pale moonlight. The air smelled of damp soil and lake water, heavy and cool. My laptop glowed on the table beside me, the preservation order still open on the screen like a shield I could hold up to the dark. Alyssa had gone to bed early, exhaustion finally claiming her after days of tension. But my mind refused rest. Every instinct told me Marcus was preparing his next strike. The knock came just after 10, sharp, hesitant, almost apologetic. I opened the door to find Sarah Hill standing there, notebook clutched to her chest, hair pulled back as though she'd come straight from work. She looked over her shoulder before stepping inside, as if the shadows themselves might report her. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice strained. "You already said that once," I replied quietly. "And yet you are." She pressed the notebook onto the table, sliding it toward me like contraband. "Marcus doesn't know I copied this. He thinks the records are sealed in the board office." Her hands trembled as she pulled them back, folding them tight against her waist. I flipped it open. Meeting minutes, board directives, contractor invoices. But more important were the annotations in the margins, Sarah's handwriting, quick and deliberate, tracking every overreach Marcus had forced through without proper vote. One entry caught my eye. Security escalation approved by executive order, not majority board consent. I looked up at her. "He acted without quorum?" She nodded, eyes wide, guilt etched into every line of her face. "He bullied the rest of us into silence, said if we didn't sign off, we'd be fined ourselves. He controls them with fear. I stayed quiet because—" her voice cracked. "Because I thought if I kept my head down, I could protect the kids I teach," I was wrong. Her confession hit harder than I expected. For weeks I'd seen her flinch under Marcus's shadow, torn between loyalty and conscience. Now she was breaking it open, exposing the truth piece by piece. "Sarah, this is more than overreach," I said. "This is improper authority. Courts don't look kindly on unilateral enforcement, especially when minors are involved." Her lips pressed thin. "I know, that's why I'm here. He's planning to push removal of the oak at the next session, claims it's a safety hazard. He even drafted a notice already, but it hasn't been approved. If he posts it, he'll be acting outside his role again." The words tightened the air between us. Marcus wasn't just escalating. He was laying the groundwork to erase the symbol that tied this fight together. The oak wasn't just a tree. It was a memorial, a promise, a line he couldn't be allowed to cross. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I can't keep serving on that board if I don't do something. But if he finds out I came to you—" She shook her head, fear written in every gesture. "You've already done something," I told her. "You've given me exactly what I need. This isn't just about body cams anymore. It's about authority. He's building a tower on sand, and you just handed me the proof." Tears welled at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Use it. Just promise me you'll make it count." I closed the notebook gently, as if sealing a pact. "I will." She exhaled, shaky but resolved, then stood. "I should go before anyone notices." At the door she hesitated, her silhouette framed against the moonlit street. "Daniel, if he takes the oak, he takes more than wood and leaves. He takes our voice. Don't let him." Her words lingered long after she disappeared into the night. I sat back down at the table, fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. The lake breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain, whispering through the open door like an oath repeated. Marcus thought escalation kept him untouchable, but Sarah's confession had shifted the ground beneath him. Now I had two chains, one legal, bound by the preservation order, and one procedural, rooted in the authority he lacked. Both were tightening around his grip. The oak swayed in the distance, branches brushing the night sky, and I knew the storm was coming fast. But for the first time, Marcus wouldn't be the only one steering it. I didn't sleep that night. Sarah's notebook sat on the table in front of me, its pages heavy with proof of Marcus's overreach. Every line she'd scribbled tightened the net around him, exposing decisions made without votes, orders issued without authority. The weight of it pressed against my chest, not as panic, but as clarity. Marcus wasn't running a board. He was running a personal fiefdom, and now I had the tools to break it apart. By morning, I knew the next move. I drove to the downtown library, a building of glass and steel rising above the street, its quiet hum a world away from Marcus's manicured cul-de-sacs. Inside, the air was cool, filled with the faint musk of paper and the soft rhythm of keyboards. I chose a seat near the back, spreading Sarah's notebook beside my laptop. Sunlight cut across the table, lighting the ink like fresh wounds. I began building the framework. Step 1. Confirm the easement records that protected the green. Those documents would anchor the case, proving Alyssa had every right to walk that path. Step 2. Link Marcus's unilateral orders to the board's lack of consent, a direct violation of HOA bylaws. Step 3. Tie both threads to the preserved body cam footage, which would show how far he had pushed his guards beyond contractual scope. One chain alone might bend. 3 together would strangle his defense. As I typed, memories of my auditing days surfaced, the late nights poring over procurement contracts, the satisfaction of catching a buried clause that unraveled entire schemes. Back then, it was work. Now, it was personal. My brother's name engraved on that plaque, Alyssa's wrist still marked by steel cuffs. These weren't abstract cases. They were reasons to fight with everything I had. Halfway through my notes, the librarian wheeled past with a cart, pausing to glance at Sarah's notebook. She smiled faintly, mistaking it for coursework, then moved on. Her presence reminded me of something I'd nearly overlooked. Marcus thrived in silence, but public exposure was his greatest weakness. Once people saw his methods stripped bare, the fear he thrived on would collapse. I printed out the easement record, stapled clean, time-stamped by the county months earlier. No ambiguity. Residents had the right to cross the green. I tucked it into a folder with Sarah's notes, feeling the pieces lock into place. The victory strategy was no longer an idea. It was a plan. Leaving the library, the city hit me with its noise. Horns blaring, vendors shouting, pigeons scattering across the sidewalk. I clutched the folder tight, weaving through the crowd toward my car. Every step reminded me that this wasn't just paperwork. It was a weapon, sharpened and ready. Back home, Alyssa was on the porch sketching the oak. Her pencil moved quick, her focus unbroken, as though drawing the tree gave her strength. I sat beside her, letting the folder rest on my lap. "How's it coming?" I asked. She showed me the page, branches sweeping across the sky, roots deep and strong. At the base, she'd drawn a figure, small but steady. "That's you," she said softly. I couldn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the folder beside her sketchbook. "Then we'll make sure it stands, together." That evening, I drove to the community center where residents often gathered for events. The hall smelled of floor polish and faint popcorn from last week's movie night. I set up at a corner table, spreading my papers carefully. People trickled in, some curious, some cautious. Brian arrived first, nodding at me before taking a seat. Soon, a few more joined, faces tight with unease but hungry for truth. I didn't grandstand. I simply laid the easement record where all could see, then turned Sarah's notes so the signatures, or lack of them, were visible. Whispers rippled around the table. Neighbors exchanged glances. For the first time, Marcus's authority didn't feel absolute. It felt brittle. When the meeting broke up, Brian lingered. "This is enough to get him out, isn't it?" "Not yet," I said, "but it's enough to make him answer." I packed the papers slowly, the folder heavier than before, not with weight, but with resolve. Marcus believed escalation kept him untouchable. What he didn't realize was that every escalation now fed directly into the trap I was setting. As I stepped outside, the evening sky burned gold over the lake. The oak swayed gently in the breeze, and I whispered a quiet promise. "We're close. Hold steady." The folder never left my side after that night at the community center. I carried it tucked beneath my arm as if it were part of me, the way my brother once carried his helmet to every shift. One symbolized duty, the other survival. Mine was both now. The next morning, I drove across town to a small law office near the courthouse square. The building was brick, sun-faded, with a brass plaque that read, "Ellison and Green, Attorneys at Law." I hadn't stepped into a legal office since retirement, but I knew I needed an external layer of reinforcement. Expertise plus evidence. That was the only formula Marcus couldn't twist. Inside, the place smelled of old leather and ink. A receptionist led me to a modest conference room. Moments later, attorney Linda Green entered, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, carrying the kind of quiet authority that didn't need raising her voice. "What brings you in, Mr. Carter?" she asked, taking a seat across from me. I slid the folder forward. HOA overreach, private security cuffed my niece on an easement. I've secured a preservation order on their body cam footage. And, I tapped Sarah's notebook, I've got evidence of board actions taken without quorum. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through the papers. Improper authority, contract violations, unlawful restraint of a minor. This is more than an HOA squabble. "That's exactly what it is," I said. "Marcus thrives on intimidation, but the moment this enters a courtroom, intimidation loses power." She closed the folder and leaned back. "Chain of custody is your strongest weapon. Judges despise spoliation. If the footage shows what you're describing, you don't just have a civil case. You have leverage to dismantle his entire operation." Her words landed like steel on stone. I'd known it in my bones, but hearing it confirmed gave me focus. "Then we prepare for that confrontation." She nodded. "I'll draft a motion for disclosure once the preservation order matures. You'll need resident affidavits, too. Anyone who witnessed the restraint should submit a statement." Brian's whispered courage, the neighbors' murmurs at the center, Sarah's conflicted testimony. They weren't just voices now. They were evidence waiting to be formalized. Leaving the office, I stepped into the courthouse square. The fountain gurgled softly, pigeons cooed, and the midday sun burned hot against my shoulders. But all I felt was clarity. Each piece was falling into place. Marcus thought he was writing a story of control. What he didn't realize was that I was already drafting the ending. That evening, I met Sarah again, this time not in secret, but in the library. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of books wrapped the room in quiet gravity. She sat across from me, notebook open, hands steadier than before. "I'll testify," she said without hesitation. I searched her eyes. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," she replied. "I've spent weeks watching him twist rules, but watching Alyssa shoved against that car, that broke something. I can't hide anymore." Her resolve felt like a turning tide. For the first time, she wasn't just conflicted, she was decided. She'd crossed the threshold Marcus relied on to keep everyone cowed. We spent the next hour drafting her affidavit. Every word mattered. Every date. Every vote Marcus had forced through without consent. She detailed the threats he made behind closed doors, the fines he waved like weapons. When she finished, she signed her name with a steady hand. As I slid the paper into the folder, the weight shifted again, stronger, sharper. The case was no longer just mine. It belonged to every witness Marcus had silenced. Walking out into the night, Sarah paused beside me on the library steps. "He's not going to take this quietly," she said. "No," I agreed. "But he won't take it on his terms anymore." The streetlights glowed pale orange against the asphalt. Across the parking lot, I thought I saw the silhouette of a black SUV idling, its lights dim, watching, waiting. Marcus's reach didn't surprise me anymore, but this time I didn't feel the edge of fear. I felt readiness. I gripped the folder tighter, the paper edges biting into my palm. Preparation was nearly complete. The evidence was preserved, the authority violations documented, the witnesses aligned. The next step wasn't gathering, it was execution. As Sarah walked to her car, she gave me a small nod, not of fear, but of solidarity. I returned it, then turned toward the oak standing dark against the horizon. The branches swayed, whispering the same word over and over in my mind. Ready. The days leading up to the board meeting felt like the longest of my life. The neighborhood carried a strange quiet, as if everyone knew something was about to break, but no one wanted to name it. Even the children at the playground played softer, their voices hushed beneath the looming presence of the security guards who now lingered on corners like sentries. The oak stood at the center of it all, silent, unbending, a witness waiting for its moment in court. I spent those days at Brian's house. His garage had become a temporary war room, not cluttered with tools or storage boxes, but with folding tables covered in affidavits, printouts, and the careful notes Sarah had given me. The air smelled of oil and sawdust, but beneath it was the hum of determination. Brian poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the table. "You've got the affidavits from me, the Johnsons, and the Millers. All of us saw Alyssa that night." He paused, his hand tightening around his mug. "But Marcus has already started telling people it was staged, that you provoked the guards for a lawsuit." I shook my head. "That's exactly why the footage matters. Nobody can spin a chain of custody. It shows what it shows, and now it's protected." Sarah arrived just after sunset, her expression tight but resolute. She carried a manila envelope filled with more documents, emails, board memos, handwritten notes. "I pulled what I could without drawing attention," she said. "This proves Marcus acted without quorum on 3 separate enforcement measures, not just Alyssa's case." I spread the papers out under the yellow bulb hanging from the ceiling, each page stacked on the last, forming a wall Marcus couldn't climb. "This is enough," I said quietly. "It has to be." Still, there was no ignoring the tension clawing at me. Marcus wouldn't back down easily. His power had always relied on fear, and when fear loses its grip, men like him lash out. The following evening, I sat in the back row of the community center, folder resting against my knee. The hall buzzed with voices, neighbors uneasy, glancing around as if waiting for a blow to fall. Marcus stood at the front with his usual confidence, gavel in hand, his face smooth but his eyes restless. He saw me, saw the folder, and for the first time in weeks, his smirk didn't come easily. He cleared his throat. "Tonight's agenda will cover landscaping violations, community safety, and removal of hazardous structures, including the oak in the center green." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alyssa, sitting beside me, gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. I kept my eyes forward, calm, steady. The moment was here. When Marcus raised his gavel to call the vote, I stood. The scrape of my chair against the tile drew every head in the room. "Point of order," I said clearly. My voice carried in the silence. "This board cannot vote on removal of the oak because the agenda item was never properly filed, and because multiple prior enforcement measures were executed without quorum. I have documentation to prove it." The room erupted. Neighbors whispered, pointed, shifted in their seats. Marcus slammed his gavel against the podium. "Sit down, Carter. This is board business." I stepped forward, folder in hand. Board business requires board authority, and when that authority is exceeded, it becomes unlawful. These affidavits, these records, and this preservation order show exactly that. I placed the folder on the table before him, my hand firm. For a moment, the room hung suspended, everyone waiting to see which way the balance would tip. Marcus's jaw worked, his hand trembling as he tried to hold the gavel steady. His eyes darted to Sarah, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she stood. "Daniel's right," she said, her voice breaking but loud enough to carry. These votes never passed. Marcus acted alone. The effect was immediate. The crowd turned, murmurs swelling into outrage. The Johnsons rose to their feet, nodding. Brian spoke out next. "We saw what happened to Alyssa. We signed statements. This has to stop." The control Marcus had wielded like a weapon was slipping through his fingers. His voice grew louder, harsher, but it couldn't drown the tide rising against him. I met his eyes across the room. "Tomorrow, this goes beyond these walls. Judge Ellis will review the footage himself, and when he does, every move you made will be on record." Marcus's hand dropped from the gavel. The room thundered with voices now, the residents no longer afraid to speak. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The walls he'd built of fear and intimidation were collapsing, and he knew it. I gathered my folder, Alyssa's hand still gripping my arm. The confrontation had begun, but the true reckoning was yet to come. The courthouse lobby echoed with every step as residents filed through the security line. Marble floors gleamed under the morning light, and the murmur of voices rose like a low tide. This wasn't just another HOA meeting. This was public. The hearing had drawn neighbors, parents, even people from outside the development who'd read about the case in the local paper. Marcus had wanted authority. Now he had an audience. Judge Ellis presided from the bench, his presence calm but unmistakably firm. His robe pooled against the chair, his eyes scanning the courtroom, as if measuring the weight of truth before a word was spoken. I sat at the petitioner's table, the folder beside me, Sarah on one side and Alyssa just behind, her small frame steady despite the attention pressing down on her. Marcus sat opposite, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear, though his expression stayed fixed in its practiced mask. The bailiff called for order. Conversations hushed, and the sound of shuffling papers filled the silence. Judge Ellis's gaze landed on Marcus. "We are here to review allegations of unlawful restraint by private security and actions taken by the Meadowbrook Green HOA without proper authority. Mr. Carter, you may proceed." I stood, sliding the preservation order across the table. "Your Honor, 3 items form the core of this matter. First, the easement recorded with the county that grants residents passage across the community green. Second, the affidavits of neighbors who witnessed a minor, my niece, unlawfully restrained by security. Third, the preserved body cam footage, recorded under contract, now under court protection." The judge nodded once. "Play the footage." The screen lit up, grainy at first, then sharpening into the image that had seared itself. Into my mind. Alyssa's face pressed against the patrol car window, the oak standing solemn in the background. The guards' voices crackled through the speakers, ordering her down, while Marcus's figure loomed just behind them, directing, confident. Gasps broke from the gallery. Parents covered their mouths. Someone muttered, "She's just a kid." The footage continued, showing my own voice entering the frame, calm but firm, invoking the easement, the contract scope, the preservation hold. The red light on the camera blinked steadily, undeniable, inarguable. When the video ended, silence filled the room like a heavy fog. Judge Ellis folded his hands. Mr. Greer, do you wish to respond? Marcus rose, his voice sharp. The board has the authority to enforce community safety. Trespass. Correction, I interrupted, sliding another document forward. Board authority requires quorum. These are the minutes Sarah Hill has provided, showing no vote ever occurred to authorize expanded enforcement or removal of the oak. Marcus acted unilaterally. The judge turned his gaze to Sarah. Ms. Hill, can you confirm this? Sarah stood, her notebook clutched tight. Her voice trembled at first, but strength grew with every word. Yes, Your Honor. He threatened us with fines if we refused. We never approved these measures. He acted alone. The room erupted in whispers. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent now leaned forward, anger flashing in their eyes. Brian stood from the back row. We all saw Alyssa get slammed against that car. We signed statements. We're not afraid anymore. Others nodded, their voices overlapping, the tide finally breaking free. Marcus slammed his palm against the table. This is a smear campaign. Judge Ellis's gavel cracked through the noise. Enough. The footage speaks for itself. The affidavits corroborate it, and the lack of quorum invalidates your claims of authority. What occurred was an overreach, plain and simple. The gallery erupted again, this time not in whispers, but in open outrage. People stood, pointing at Marcus, demanding accountability. The walls of fear he'd relied on had collapsed completely in the face of public truth. I turned slightly, catching Alyssa's gaze. She looked stronger now, her chin lifted, eyes unflinching as if the weight she carried had finally shifted off her shoulders. She whispered one word. Finally. Judge Ellis leaned forward, his tone deliberate. The court will move to sanction Iron Watch security for unlawful restraint of a minor, and a temporary injunction is hereby granted preventing the removal of the oak or any further enforcement actions without full board consent. This matter will proceed to civil review. The gavel struck once more. Marcus sagged into his chair, mask slipping, his control shattered in front of the very people he had ruled by fear. The audience surged with relief and fury alike, a wave he could no longer. Command. I gathered the folder, the weight of it lighter now. The oak stood safe for the moment, and the truth no longer hidden in whispers. The reckoning had been public, and Marcus had been forced to face it, where smirks could not survive, under oath, in the presence of his own community. The courthouse emptied slowly, voices echoing down the marble halls as residents spilled out in clusters. Relief hung in the air, mingled with outrage and something else, hope. For years, fear of Marcus's fines had bound this community like chains. But tonight those chains had cracked in front of a judge, and everyone had witnessed it. I lingered near the steps, folder tucked under my arm, Alyssa standing at my side. She leaned against me, her hand still gripping the strap of her backpack. For the first time since that terrible night by the patrol car, I saw her shoulders relax. She looked at me with a faint smile, and I caught in her expression the memory of my brother, his steadiness, his refusal to yield. It was all there in her eyes. Sarah joined us at the bottom of the stairs. Her notebook was pressed to her chest, but her posture was different now, upright, steady, unafraid. She had chosen her side in public, and in doing so, she had shed the weight Marcus had forced onto her. You did the right thing, I told her. So did you, she said. But this isn't over. He'll try to claw back what he's lost. I nodded. Let him try. Every move he makes now is evidence against him. Brian and a few other neighbors gathered nearby, their conversations loud, their voices no longer hushed. For the first time, people weren't afraid to be seen together. They weren't looking over their shoulders for Marcus's enforcers. They were looking ahead. The oak waited for us when we returned. Its branches stretched into the night sky, leaves whispering in the cool wind. Someone had tied ribbons around its trunk, small gestures of solidarity, proof that the community had already begun to reclaim what Marcus had tried to take. Alyssa touched one of the ribbons, her fingers tracing it gently. This tree stood before Marcus ever held a gavel, I said, and it'll stand long after. Her voice was soft but certain. Because we fought for it. I placed my hand on the bark, the same way my brother once had, the texture rough and grounding. The fight wasn't just about bylaws or fines. It was about legacy, protecting the things that gave meaning to a place, to a family, to a community. Marcus had tried to erase that, and in the process, he had revealed the depth of what we all stood to lose. Sarah lingered a moment longer before heading home, her steps lighter than I'd ever seen them. She had crossed her own line, and the neighborhood would remember her courage. As for Marcus, he had left the courthouse in silence, slipping into the back of a black SUV. But silence wasn't strength anymore. It was retreat. The next board session would come soon enough, and the injunction would hang over every word he tried to speak. His authority was no longer unquestioned. It was fractured, weakened, and under watch. And Judge Ellis had made it clear, this wasn't just about HOA politics anymore. It was about the law. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with Alyssa asleep inside, I looked out over the green. The oak stood illuminated by a single streetlight, casting long shadows across the grass. I thought about my brother, about the day he planted it, about the promise I made at his graveside. That promise had been tested, bent, nearly broken. But it held, and it always would. The community had seen what truth looked like under oath, projected on a screen for all to witness. Fear couldn't survive that light. And now, the residents of Meadowbrook Green carried something stronger than silence. They carried proof, solidarity, and the memory of standing together. I exhaled slowly, the cool night air filling my lungs, and whispered, "We're still standing." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.